Good evening, welcome. I'm Megan Rust, educator for interpretation here at the Frist Art Museum. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Frist Art Museum acknowledges and pays respect to the Cherokee and Shawnee Native peoples and elders who call this land we're standing on today their homeland. We also acknowledge and offer deep gratitude to the ancestral land and water that supports us. We are thrilled to have Rose B. Simpson here this evening. Rose is a mixed media artist from Santa Clara, Pueblo, New Mexico. Her work engages ceramic sculpture, metals, fashion, performance, music, installation, writing, and custom cars. She received a Master's of Fine Arts in Ceramics from Rhode Island School of Design in 2011, and a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts in 2018. Her work is collected in museums across the continent and has been exhibited internationally. Maria, the 1985 El Camino restored by the artist, opens the exhibition Hearts of Our People and is on view in our Ingram Gallery until January 12th, 2020. At this time, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors for Hearts of Our People. Platinum sponsor HCA Foundation on behalf of HCA TriStar Health. Gold sponsor the Ann and Joe Russell family. Hospitality sponsor Union Station Hotel. And the education and community engagement sponsor the Wingate Foundation. Hearts of Our People has been made possible in part by a major grant from the Henry Luce Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities, Exploring the Human Endeavor. And as always, we are grateful for the continuing operating support from Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Tennessee Arts Commission, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Rose, thank you so much for being with us this evening and for your lecture. Now please join me in welcoming Rose B. Simpson to the stage.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming out. This is super exciting. I'm cold, so I'm gonna leave my jacket on for a little while until I warm up, but I think it'll happen. I just gotta get I wanna take a moment to give thanks. And I've been trying to make more time to do that. And this is a really great opportunity. Thank you to the Frist. Thank you to all the people who support the arts. Thank you for the people who care and take time to care. Thank you for all our food. Thank you for all the plants and animals that gave our lives for us to be here today and every day. Thank you to the land below our feet for watching us and holding us up through all our foibles and all our beauty and all our silly and all our vulnerable and all our scared and all our real. Thank you to the ancestors whose breath we breathe in now. We are them. Thank you for believing in us when we forget that you're there watching. Thank you to the grandmas and the grandpas and the people that gave us food when we were hungry. And thank you to the little children who let us remember what's important every day with their little hands and their little faces. I miss my baby girl. I just have a little girl, and I love her. And thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for making time in all of your precious days. These are your hours and minutes and seconds, and they're precious, and thank you for making time for this conversation. When we share an intention. It's much stronger if it's received and acknowledged. What I do isn't as powerful without your eyes and your ears and your bodies and your minds and your voices acknowledging it and giving it power, giving it energy, giving it wings, and letting it go where it needs to go. Because this is how we change the world, and we have a world that needs changing. My name is Rose, and I'm here to say, I realize that a lot of people are now associating me with my car, which I think is really beautiful. My life work has been in sculpture mostly, and so I'm going to show you guys a little bit about my is it really super loud? Can I stand like back here? Okay, I'm trying to be impactful, but I don't want to break your eardrums either, because that doesn't help anything. Because then you can't hear. So I just want to show you guys and give you guys like a full sort of spectrum of my intention so that you guys can see more clearly what Maria really comes from, right? My name is Rose, and this is a picture of me. That's my welding helmet, and it's very special to me because it's really hard to find a good welding helmet, and I want my eyes to keep working. Let's see, what do we have here? That's my mama in the yellow. You probably recognize her if you guys have seen the videos. Her name is Roxanne. She also has a wonderful piece in the exhibit of babies napping on a mom. And the woman below her is my grandmother, Rena Swensel, who is an incredible, she was one of the first PhDs from my tribe and wrote extensively and educated extensively about indigenous theory and perspectives. I love this picture because this picture on the left is traditionally from Isleta, Pueblo, actually, but in Pueblo villages, the women built the houses and maintained them. They belong to us, matriarchal societies. And because of my grandmother and my mother, we've maintained these traditions. The piece on the left is actually clay tile with mud plaster that I made in graduate school when people were asking me what it meant to be an Indian person all the time. What does that mean? What's that look like? How come you don't use that imagery more in your work, et cetera, et cetera? And I was like, it's like this. So on the left is actually a photo of my tribe from 1910, right? And that woman that I've depicted there is actually a relation from around that same time. And I love that photo because of the look on her face. And I want to go beyond the stereotypes. I want to go beyond the image and talk about the feeling. And so I made this piece, and I called it To Be Pueblo. It's actually in the collection of Portland Art Museum. If you're over there, check it out. But it has all these ceramic geese that are flying. And I've been really caught by the intention of migrating birds, where you just keep going and going and going, and you follow culture and you stay together as community. And the feeling of being a Pueblo person was not what you look like, right? It was the intention behind it. It's you keep flapping. No matter how many get shot down, you keep flapping. Because you have no other choice. You have to go with the seasons and do the thing. And so that intentionality is really important. My mother is a spectacular person. I spoke to educators earlier, which was really cool. But I talked about privilege and about how I try and hold myself accountable for my privileges and understand where I have extra blessing and extra access because of my privileges. One of those is right here, right? I watched my mother, who became a contemporary sculptor because she had a speech impediment and couldn't talk to her mom. And because her mom had clay, she would make little figures out of clay to show her mom how she felt or what she needed. And so she became this really spectacular sculptor out of necessity. And she supported our whole family with this from when I was a small child. And so I have the neural pathway that art is what you do, right? So that was never a question. My parents weren't like, oh, you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I'm like, of course, you're going to be an artist. And you're going to do good. And you're going to feed your kids. It's going to be fine, right? And that's definitely a neural pathway that I don't struggle with. And that's a blessing. So I get to do this, right? And I get to take it to the next level. I also spoke about that genocide for Native peoples is very fresh. And for my great-grandmother, she couldn't say certain things because you could still get killed for what you say and what you do. You don't squeak, you don't stick out, you don't say things that are hard because the blood is still dripping, right? It's still wet. My grandma pushed, and she was brave, and she said things, but not as much as I can now. And now, genocide is further and further away, and I can stand up here in front of you guys and say things that would have made my ancestors tremble because it would have been their demise. That's a privilege that I have here, right? I also fit certain stereotypes that make me more comfortable to look at. I fit a more white passing person of color because my dad is white, right? So in certain circles, I am more acceptable to listen to. I have access in ways that some of my peers don't. And that's not funny. It's true. And because I can do that and I can get access into those places, I have to say the things. I have to say, yo, I see that. I saw that too. And that's my responsibility. And I have to look at my own white privilege and see how I'm abusing that as well, right? What am I using? How am I being unconscious? If I can do it, we all can, right? Let me just go back a little bit here. Also, one of my privileges is that I grew up at Santa Clara, Pueblo. I grew up on our tribal ancestral homelands. We weren't relocated. The house that I used to stay with my grandma in was my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma's house, right? I love it there. It is my home. It is the center of the world. There's a rock in the Pueblo, and that's the center of my world, legit. Like it's we call it zipping the belly button of the earth. And I'll always go home there. I have something to lose. They can kick me out. They can excommunicate me if I do the wrong thing, if I say something I shouldn't, if I share too much. Pueblo people have been dealing with colonization for a really long time because of the Spanish that first came through the area of New Mexico looking for the 7 cities of gold. From the very beginning, we realized that if we shared too much of our culture, we would be killed. There was really, really, really harsh consequences to giving too much information to the colonizers. The reason we have so much of our culture left is because we zipped it. And we figured out how to continue our thing, but in silence and in quiet. Which has been an incredible blessing because I can't make easy art. I can't make Indian art. I can't put a feather on it and make it my livelihood. I'm not saying that's a bad thing because there's a lot of indigenous people that are forced to live in our capitalistic economy instead of our old life ways because of colonization. They are forced to sell their culture in order to make a living in this world that we're forced to live in. I don't blame anyone for that, but I can't do it the same way. The El Camino is one of the most dangerous pieces of art I have ever made for my tribe because I put things into it that are very culturally related, right? They're very culturally applicable. The blessing that I have is that I have to understand what makes us human. And I'm trying to find how every person on this planet is indigenous to this planet. Because if we can find out our common humanity, maybe we can stop hurting each other. And maybe we can learn to work together and stop stepping on each other so that we can save this planet that's on the brink of demise. It's serious, right? With all the plants and animals that are dying and with the children coming up, we have work to do. And places like this and artwork can build conversation to make us all evolve. I look for the moments of suspended disbelief when people go, wait, what? And in that wait, what? There's a glitch, right? It goes, zzz, zzz, like, this is a crack in the matrix, right? And I'm like, all right, get in. While it's glitching, you got to enter, and that's how we evolve. That's how we get to people, right? I've lived in a glitch. My entire life has been a glitch in the matrix. Because we're indigenous people, but we're also living in our current life. So this was me in high school, right? And I went to the Santa Fe Indian School, which is Indian boarding school. It's nothing but Native kids. And yet we're trying to understand where we fit in our youth cultures, right? And so my art started representing and reflecting what I was experiencing. And I realized the more honest I made it to my current experience, the more influential it became. So I also come from the lowrider capital of the world. You guys know what a lowrider is? This is a lowrider. This photo was taken in the late 80s, I believe, by a woman named Meridel Rubenstein. And Espanola is a place of tri-cultures, right? There's indigenous, there's the local Pueblo people, there's the Hispanic population, the descendants of the colonizers, of the conquistadors, and there's also the Genizaros, who are the descendants of the Spanish indigenous slaves, who make up what is now known as the Chicano population, right? And then we also have the newest members of our community being the U.S. people, the white people, right? Or the European, not Spanish European, but the people that came from the East Coast when the United States was made. And so there's all this tension. There's lots of tension and lots of conflict, and there has been for centuries in the area. But one of the aesthetic releases and empowerment that the community has are lowriders. And it's one of the most amazing places because there's more lowriders per capita than Orange County, California. So I've researched and I've done, like when Megan was introducing me, she said I do a lot of things, and this is part of that. So I've explored many ways to find the ways that artistic expression can transform society. One of them has been spray paint, the power of spray paint. This is me teaching a can control workshop at Western New Mexico University. So from a young age, I figured out how powerful spray paint is, especially on trains. It goes far. It's really influential. Not only that, but you put it out there and then you hide and no one ever knows it was you. So you don't have to actually stand by it, and then you're not as vulnerable, which is important when you're a scared teenager. This is an example of my work, is the portrait on the right. And this is another guy from my tribe on the left. And that's a portrait of a girl I went to school with who overdosed from heroin and died. This is music. So all through high school, I was in an indigenous hip-hop group called Nate Carroll and the True Native Thugs. And then when I was later, I got super into underground hip-hop, and I was in a group called the Garbage Pail Kids, and we had a lot of fun. And then I started throwing microphones around, and that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of power in performance. And I was talking about this earlier, that when you perform, you have to stand by your art in the present moment. You can't put it over there and run away and hide. Maria is there, and you guys all can look at her, and I can hide behind the wall, and you guys don't interact with me directly, right? And I think a lot of art is safe in that way. It's not as vulnerable as performance is. This was the beginning of my interest in performance art, and I've been calling it transformance, because performance changes you. It might change the viewer, but it also transforms the performer, because you have to inhabit your belief system, just kind of like the epitome of integrity, if you can keep with it. This is a 2-story stained glass that I did that was commissioned for a casino by my house, and I thought it was funny because it was my take on the Duchamp nude descending a staircase, but she's like a traditional Pueblo dancer, and she's holding money, right? So, it's like sort of a sly political statement. Like, what are we doing here, really? What are we praying for nowadays, From the vague to the very small. Where is power, and how is more power, what is powerful? So, this is just a cast sterling silver ring. This is a collaboration with two of my cousins. One of the people is in the show, my Aunt Nora and her daughter. We grounded a very Western cube institution with an umbilical cord back to our mother, Earth, and it went through the white space. We got a horrible review in Art in America, and I was like, yes! Score! It did exactly what it was supposed to do. This is raw clay painted on the side of a building that was intended to look like a traditional adobe building, which is actually not. It's frame construction, so if you knock on it, it's hollow, which adobe is a mud brick building, which was our traditional way of doing it. And buildings were meant to live and die. So we would build them, we'd live in them, and the rain would take it back to the earth. And everything was about our life cycles and how we respect that. But this is intended to look like it, but not actually do it. So I did an ancestor on there kind of going, what the? So this is sort of talking about my experience in graduate school. And I went to RISD kind of by accident, which is silly, but they also have this enormous gas kiln. And I was thinking, I'm going to make really, really big pieces because I need to make a big impact. And by the time I left, I was only using the test kiln. So I was making these really small pieces. And I realized that we project ourselves onto anthropomorphic forms. So you don't have to create a whole installation in order to have an impact. And also, it's more sustainable to use less clay. And I thought about how, I think a lot about the environmental impact of art making. Says the person who built an El Camino that runs by 8 miles per gallon. We'll talk about that. I studied in Japan while in graduate school, and this is shigaraki clay that's fired in an anagama kiln. And I was there, like I said, the center of the earth is in my Pueblo, and the further I get from it, the further that rubber band stretches, right? And so I wanted to put myself completely out of my comfort zone so that I could build the capacity to find home within myself. And so I started making these clay bees. And the clay bees were so that we could sort of root ourselves in sort of our inner vulnerable space and hold that safe and that being home. So while at RISD, I thought a lot about the way that we present ourselves as acceptable, as palatable, as objectifiable as women, as stereotypable as indigenous people, and how we can deconstruct that to our raw humanity. And clay is an amazing material because it records the way we feel when we make it. And so the way that you act or hold yourself will show in the clay, like instantly, right? And so I began to force myself to build in ways that didn't permit me to fix anything, so that I could force myself to be okay with the process. And by doing so, I could begin to love my own internal psychological process. And by doing that and exhibiting that internal vulnerability, I hopefully can reflect that in other people and they can evolve as well. Because I can't really tell people how to be, I gotta be it, right? Or that's hypocrisy. So this is a life-size ceramic piece, and I started thinking about the energy that we put into things. And this one is a warrior. Not worry, but W-A-R-R-I-O-R. In every piece, I began lashing and tying with the intention of energy that I put into something and how that transforms it. So it doesn't have weapons, but it has a lot of power. And it's a different type of consciousness that I'm kind of evoking or trying to. And all these ways that I can approach that, right? What are the feelings I can get as we deconstruct the ways that we're supposed to look? And we find different ways to exhibit our own internal beauties and our own internal aesthetics and those energies and what they look like and how we can support each other in our evolution through relationship and consciousness with the way that we interact with each other. And honor the things that we love and ourselves in those very vulnerable places, the places that are really scary. When I was at RISD, one of the visiting artists was this artist named Arlene Sheckett, who does ceramics. And she came and she walked into my studio and she was like, I know who you are. Why are you here? I was like, it's grad school. It's what you're supposed to do. And she says, you're already successful. You don't need to be here. Then why are you here? And I was like, I guess to fight with everybody all the time. That's what graduate school is about. And she was like, you came here to do the thing that scares you the most, and you're not doing it. So if you didn't come here and push yourself, then go home. So you're wasting time. And I thought about what scares me the most. And I was like, presence, honesty, that vulnerability, that self-reflection, being completely and entirely in a space of self-reflection and then sharing that honesty so that others can, forget the intention, just like, can I really sit with that? Because it's really scary. So this piece is called The Answer That Ended Creation. And it was always like, when we have a fact, nope, that's how it is, and you never ask a question beyond that, you've stopped evolving. And so I started thinking a lot about apocalypse and the power of collapse and rebuilding and how sometimes things need to shake and fall so that we can build something else in its place. So I started building in this very, very thin manner. So I threw the clay until it was paper thin so that I couldn't go back and fix it. And I started looking at pieces as they evolved and said, hey, that's who you are. Instead of like planning, oh, you're going to look like this so that you're acceptable to my idea, I would make something and be like, hello, as they'd wake up and try and honor that. So the one on the left is about this tall and it's made with paper thin clay. And that one is it's being proud. It's rough, it's raw, it's self, but it's got these beautiful necklaces and it's proud of its rawness and its realness. This is about motherhood. The piece on the left was the first piece I made when I had after my baby, and the one on the right is a cairn, right? So as we carry those generations forward, it's a very vulnerable place of balancing. And their ancestors are always watching. Like I said earlier, it's important to remember we're not alone, and they're holding us accountable. Right? As much as they love us, they're also saying, hey, what are you doing? Sit down, behave. Right? That's what I love about Indians. Shh, cut it out. It's good. It's good to have somebody check you, because when we just have all our independence and all our entitlement, and we can patronize and condescend and walk through the world and step on whatever we want, drive over everybody and cut in line and order our thing first and all the things, which happens all the time. Remember, the ancestors are watching. Hey, cut it out. Right? Everybody needs one of these on the wall. Hey, I'm watching you. Anyway. I gotta hear it all the time too. I get super unconscious. I have to remember to snap out of it. This is me pregnant. This is a glitch. Right? This was me. So when I was pregnant, I was sitting there one day and I was like, man, I feel like I'm a 69 Chevelle going 130 through the Mojave Desert. And my brain is a little yellow balloon that's tied to the rear bumper, deflated. Right? And my body's like, whoa, doing this thing, and my brain is like, what's happening? So I made this piece. That was me pregnant, right? So it's a V8 engine. It's kind of cool. It has this belt, and the alternator actually turns. And I manufactured the fan. So it's kind of cool because it's a pot. So the head is the air intake, and these open, so they're little, containers. And then they're the baby. So you can see like the wires go from the alternator. It's really funny because the red wires, like all this, there's the distributor cap, and I made all these little clay spark plugs, and then those go to there. And this is the full extent of my electric skills, just in case you get. That's it. That's all I got. So I start thinking, this piece is about maybe 10 feet tall. And I think about perseverance, and the way that we approach things with intentionality, vigor, and how we can move forward and keep going. I had a friend who was a long-distance road cyclist, and I took all his bike parts and his old tires, and I wrapped it because all the energy of the 100 miles he rode every single day into those tires, and I wrapped them around these pieces with the Presta valves and quick releases. This is the back of a pot that's pretty large. It's based on like the Incan style mochi vessels, Peruvian. And this one is a doll, right? The head's this big. Glitch. This is the back of that. And we look long enough and we can find beauty in the flaws. We can, what we've judged as flaws, right? So what's beautiful about art school, honestly, is that we can sit with things long enough until we find why the how happened, right? This is one of my, like, every now and then I'll do a super narrative piece, and this one's called It's Complicated. This one is an ode to the mothers of color that have put up with hell and hold the future. Down here is like these like crazy stories that are cut into the metal of like intense experiences and the emotions of what our ancestors and the women of the mothers of color that perpetuated to bring us here to this day, that we're still alive because they continue to hold space for this. I think this show is spectacular. I really do. The hearts of our people. I'm really, really incredibly moved by it, and I'm really glad the Frist, got it and carry on that vision because I think it's a really important one. And this, I think, speaks to that. This one's called Genocide Makes It Complicated. And I think for people that carry post-colonial stress disorder, that sometimes we forget that we have post-colonial stress disorder, and we start judging ourselves as bad things that can't connect in certain ways because we carry these habits that are based on our trauma. And if we just name it, we can start healing it. It's pretty straightforward. And this piece is also about that intentionality and the rigor that I put into my concepts, right? So this piece is clay. It's about this tall. In the bottom part of it, I glued a million sticks. It felt like a million. That was an exaggeration. But it sure felt like a million little sticks to it. And, the kind of like monotonous intentionality where we say, I have this vision and I'm going to do what it takes to get there, one by one by one. You guys see Deani Reynolds' White Hawks painting? She's one of my best buds. And she's always teasing me because I work fast. And I'm always like, you want to trade? Because it takes her a really, really, really long time to finish one of her paintings. And so as I was putting those sticks on, I was thinking, this is for you, Deani. It's for all those times I bugged you about it. Oops. So what I did is I got a body filler, so what some people know as Bondo, and I painted it black. I tinted it black and then put it on the sticks and then sanded it down to 1,000 grit, so it was super, super smooth. And it created this pretty amazing texture you can see on the right. So if you touch it, it feels like, an El Camino. But the point is, it's like, it's called rite of passage, right? And so it's like, how do we build that kind of dedication within ourselves, I remember my daughter was colicky, and I'm a single parent, and I would hold her and just do this, right, for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, to the point where I'm like standing there talking to people, and as soon as I see a baby, I just start going like this, and just this thing forever and ever. And I realized that I had it in me. I could have never done that before her. And all of a sudden, I found this kind of like, inside of me that now, when I'm getting to a point that's really hard, it's like, you know what? She was crying all night long, and what you did was rocked her. And what you did was rocked her. And what you did was rocked her. And you got through it, And it's like, if we can just keep on, and every time it's hard, and we don't give up and say, we can do this just a little bit further, we can do this. And when you've been through hardship, and you got out, and you got through to the other side, and you saw light the next morning, that night you thought you were going to die, that's inside you, and you hold it. And if we can keep doing that, we can keep doing that, you can keep doing that, just put one foot in front of the other, just put one foot in front of the other, you can create magic. That's what that rite of passage is. This is just technically white clay with black slip that I etched through. There's more of that one. I like that one a lot. These are big. And the point of this one was I was working with a collaborator who wanted to create a sacred space. And for me, that's really sensitive issue because a sacred space looks different to a lot of people. And so I kept thinking about altar, A-L-T-A-R. Like, what is that moment where we stop and breathe and create a spiritual space? And so I made these two, obviously like 10, 11 foot tall pieces. And then I put them in the room facing each other. And I called it altar, A-L-T-E-R. And I realized the sacred space is when we connect to someone else. And that's all that matters, right? It's that when we see, we validate each other, which leads to more work that I did more recently. So this work is Pomona College Museum of Art invited me to come mine their collection of pillaged artifacts and make work in response to it. So I picked a bunch of grinding stones that were used for probably centuries to nourish people, living people, right? And had the energy of the women in the stones, right? And I created these extra large figures. One of them has 14-foot wings, and they're really tall. Like the one on the right is like, 9, 10 feet tall. And the other one is reaching into the earth, even though it has really big wings. The other one's the witness. And they're post-apocalyptic indigenous warriors is what I call it. Because we live in we're already post-apocalyptic. We've already survived an apocalypse, right? So this is our common and our current experience. And so the ancestors are along the wall. You can see the ladder there, it's pretty tall. So the ancestors are on the wall, see them? And they're looking, and they're coming to ask for direction. And they have the nourishment right there, and they're telling them, go deeper. You don't fly above it, you go into it. You go reach your fingers into the earth. That's where the answer is. So when I talked about altar, I think a lot about like duality and the power of reflection in each other, right? Whether it be, partnership, family, twins, identical twins, friendship, all these, and that how when we see each other, we can survive things. So these pieces are called They Rose. And a friend of mine just recently passed away, and his name was Wake Self. And his name was a self-prophecy, right? And so what he did was he constantly evolved and evolved. Every time I spoke to him, he was on some new level of consciousness, and he was a hip-hop artist. And his music is spectacular. It's just layers and layers and layers of conscious truth. And he told me, your name, Rose, is also a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'm like, everyone, roses, rose. It's a visual of rose, right? Rose. People give me roses, and I'm like, I have to sit and watch it die. This is pretty hard. Because he was saying, no, your name is a past tense of rise. It's a verb. It's not a noun. And so I was thinking about all the times, like I said, I've crashed and I stood up again. My knees all skinned, my fingers all busted, and I stood up and I was like, ah! Right? I rose. In our dualities, this is based on two-spirit identity, right? So this is a nod to the queer people who function in the world. But we also have two parts. We have someone always has our back because we're queer. We have both male and female in us, and we also have community. We forget sometimes. This is our mother holding up the world on her head. It's a very fragile one. And this one's called Tusked. And it's an ode to what people of color have to deal with all the time, and what kind of defenses that are built in order to survive every day in a world like this. And I put these really beautiful necklaces on them because I want to honor that every single day, after being punched in the face psychologically, spiritually, 10,000 times before the time you go back to sleep at night, you made it through another day. And you can make it through another day. And those are accolades. That if you haven't been through it all, here, I see what you're going through. And I may not know because I only know mine, and I may never know, but we need to start acknowledging it. That when I walk through downtown Santa Fe, I've been punched in the gut 6,000 times before I hit the end of the block because of all the atrocious things I have to see as a Native person. The objectification, the fetishization, all of the stereotyping. It hurts me, right? And people don't see it. This is for that. And these. I was making these pieces about the feminine and how the feminine needs to be strong, which is about this show, right? And one of the main problems, anybody know what's happening to indigenous women in this continent? We're going missing. We're going murdered. And we need to talk about it. Indigenous women are 2 times more likely to go murdered or missing than any other race on this continent. This is where we come from. Why are we being killed? This is our home. This is our mother. The ground beneath us is where we come from. Why are our bodies thrown in these rivers? So I was making pieces to try and build strength. I mean, they have like really powerful symbols and these feathers that are made of steel that have direction and protection on them. And these arms that represent the darkness that we go through and the light on the other side. And as I was making them, a little girl from my tribe went missing. She was 5 years old. They found her body 4 days later, and she had been violated to death. About 3/4 of a mile from my studio, she had just graduated from the Head Start that my daughter goes to now. I couldn't stop crying. I made these pieces for Renesmee, whose body laid in the river, the Rio Grande, our sacred water that our prayers go into, to the ocean. So I took these pieces to the river where Renesmee was found, and I dipped them in the water, the same water her body laid in. And I took my friends and my family, and we watched the sun go down. And my prayer went to the ocean with them. No matter where these sculptures end up, all my intentionality that goes into the water, that will turn into the clouds, that will rain all over our planet for all those bodies that laid there cold and went missing and never found. And the people that murdered them never got justice. This is not silly. This happens. I know like 3 people that have been killed and never been justice. no justice for them. This is an epidemic. If the pieces can't make direct change in this world to that specific end, may this image do some of that work. Right? May it reach further. So let's talk about empowered women. We can be victims or we can stand up too. There's two parts. There's accountability and there's also responsibility, right? And I want our women to be strong. One of those things has always been engines for me. I'm a very psychologically complex person, right? And trying to understand situations in the world and dynamics and relationships are very complicated. And the nice thing to do is go out and work on an engine, because gear A goes left, gear B goes right, gear C goes left. It's very, very, very calming. There's an answer to it. When I was young, I was in a very unsafe environment. And so when I turned 12, I bought a car, obviously. And I worked on it, and I got it running so that I could escape. It was my safe place. If it ran, I could outrun anyone, right? And if it was loud, I could scare them. And if it was mean, they wouldn't mess with me, right? And I would be an empowered woman, right? In this way, nobody could overpower me because I knew how that engine worked. And I could fix it, and I could get out really fast. Has anyone seen this movie? This is an amazing movie. It's called Once Were Warriors, and it's a movie about post-apocalyptic indigenous people in Auckland, New Zealand. So there's Maori people, and it's talking about that experience. And when I first saw this movie, I saw these guys cruising in that ride, and I was like, ooh, I want to feel that, right? It was just like I'm not Maori, right? But I'm Pueblo. How can I do this Pueblo style? Because I know the feeling of rolling like that with all your people. You got Skeena, and you're cruising, and there's nobody can mess with you. Imagine if that was just a carload of really super empowered indigenous women, and we're cruising through town, and nobody's going to mess with us. Right? From the feeling of being super victimized, like what's happening to indigenous women, can we turn this around and feel like this? And we have such an amazing heritage of strong women, right? And one of them was Maria Martinez, right? And not only because she was carrying on her tradition and she was feeding her whole, not just her family, but her whole community. She was actually, with her art career, she was taking care of many, 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 many people. Just beyond, she was a nurturer, beyond even just her children. This aesthetic is the epitome of my cultural heritage, I feel, right? This feeling is what the prayers smell like. This feeling is real, it's serious, it's raw, it is that relationship to place, right? There you see the river, right? And then there's this thing. So when I was at Rhode Island School of Design, I studied relational aesthetics. I was really interested in performance art, just really interested in it. And I studied relational aesthetics. There was a teacher there named Yoriko Saito who wrote a book called Aesthetics of the Everyday. I was also trying to write my thesis, trying to explain indigenous aesthetics and why it doesn't necessarily fit in the Western constructs of explaining it even, right? So instead of writing the 6 required pages for the thesis, I wrote 80 because my teachers had to read it. It's like, sit down and read this, okay? And then they're going to put it in the RISD library next to Kara Walker, and people can read this for a long time. It's going to be there, right? I'm going to say these things. And so I really studied, and I tried to find the words that I could explain indigenous aesthetics. And I actually found a lot of what I was looking for in Japanese aesthetics. Japanese aesthetics and Nicholas Bourriard's relational aesthetics. And so I came, all my friends were like, we're going to New York and get famous. I was like, good for you. I'm going home. I'm going to grow some food and remember what's important and remember that capitalism doesn't own me, right, to start with. And then I'm going to go to school for automotive science so I can build a relational experience, right? So I went home and I found a 68 Buick Skylark. I didn't know much at the time. I didn't know that Buick parts are really hard to find. And it was totally rusted out. So I spent a year and a half just welding floors of a Buick Skylark. And I was like, okay, I need a drivetrain so I could drive it around. So I found this 1985 Chevy El Camino on the side of the road for $3,000. Had a running Chevy drivetrain. I was like, I'm going to take the drivetrain out of this thing since it runs. It's ugly, super ugly, but it's an El Camino and it has a GM8 body, which is great for hydraulics, right? And I'm in Espanola, right? So if I take the drivetrain out, I'll still be able to sell the body being the frame because it's great for hydraulics, right? So GM8 body is a solid frame and it doesn't crack when you hop, right? So there are very specific cars that are good for hydraulics. You guys know what hydraulics are, yeah? Great, that's awesome. I love that. This is a good crew. So I got this car thinking I would just like part it up and part ways with it. And then I was like, well, if I pull out this dent, then I'll sell it for more. Well, if I do this, and I'll sell it for more. Well, I'll do this and sell it for more. Next thing you know, I'm like, this is fun. So that was Maria. And part of it was because, see this truck in the back? That's my Ford F-150. I lifted it. It has like dual exhaust and headers. It's a lot of fun, but it's up high, right? And my mom is short. My nephew's even shorter. And there's a field behind that needed to be harvested. And my mom was like, let's take that ugly thing back there. And then we can just reach into the back and harvest. And this was my aha moment. This was the glitch, right, that I evolved. And I saw it and I was like, I may not be a traditional potter per se, but I'm seeing pottery with this. You guys see the pottery? I'm seeing like this is how I can actually do that, right? And this is the aha moment you guys are seeing. When we could reach over the bed and husk the corn. And yeah. So I started breaking this car down. It was entirely sideswiped. One whole side had like solid 1.5 inches of filler in it. So it was heavy. So I dropped, it lost about 10 pounds of just filler from a really crappy body job. And then the whole back end was smashed in, so I had to rebuild the whole tailgate in both, each side of the tailgate there looked like the steel looked like a crumpled piece of paper. And I went to school at Northern New Mexico College, which was basically lowrider school. And the way if you showed up to school, you had to bring a car, right? And I was the only girl there, and everybody had a 64 Impala, right? Paul and Jose and Mario, they all had a 64 Impala, and I showed up with this El Camino. And so, my teacher, this was our class. You have to paint this car, right? You have to do all the collision repair on this car. And it was easy to do to get my credits because I could drive it. The Buick was harder to move. So I just started doing that. And my teacher would come with a knife, and he'd scratch the surface. If we threw paint or if we threw primer, he'd come and scratch it. And if he caught anything more than a dime's width of body filler anywhere, he'd make us redo the whole thing. So Maria has a really, 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 really good, if he wasn't there, I probably would have done a worse job. And when I do the next car, I'm probably not going to hold those same standards. But Maria was a lot of metal work, and I learned a lot about, pulling dents and sheet metal work. And the intention was still to flip the body. And then I got a residency at the Denver Art Museum. And then I had a deadline, right? And the thing was, I gave a proposal. I'm going to sit in the Denver Art Museum since I can't work in clay, and they put me in the indigenous wing of the Denver Art Museum behind glass, and it felt kind of like a monkey in a cage. And I sat there, and I sewed leather outfits, right? And then anyone who came in, I'd let them try them on. There's these high school kids would come in, they'd put on all my post-apocalyptic indigenous warrior outfits and streak through the whole Denver Art Museum. It was really righteous. And so I had this deadline, so I drove from Denver back to Espanola every 2 weeks, and I finished this car so that I could do a parade in downtown Denver for one of their first Friday events. But to do it, I had to enlist all my buds. It was like a full girl crew. And then I threw a satin black, which is a hot rod black. I talked to my teacher. I was like, so, Mr. Moya, you think I could throw a glass clear over a satin? And he's like, no, you can't do that. Nobody's ever done that. I was like, can I try it? And he's like, if you mess it up, you're going to have to sand it all back down again, and that's not going to be my fault. If you notice, I also took out the running lights right here. There were running lights on the tail. And I cut the metal plates, and I was welding them in, and my teacher rolls up, and he's like, you're going to get pulled over for that. And I was like, if they pull you over, tell them I told you not to do it because you're going to get in trouble. I was like, yeah, but it's messing up the whole aesthetic. So I threw a glass clear, and I pulled the tape off, and I screamed. I shrieked. Everybody was like, oh my God, what happened? I was like, woo! Yeah. And then I had my traditional pot. I was a traditional potter. So quick story for those gearheads in here. I blew the first engine. And I saw it as an opportunity to get a bigger one. 2 a.m. while I was getting my buds to hold the car from rolling back down a hill while I was taking out the drive shaft to throw it under the back wheel so I wouldn't get run over so the tow truck could come take the car home. I was like, I'm going to get a bigger engine. So I got a 410 horsepower 350, and I put it in, and it has a TKO 600 drag race transmission with a Hurst shifter. And so if you know anything about engines, if you bore out the cylinders so much, you don't have any vacuum, and vacuum's super important. I found out after the fact, vacuum's super important because you can go really fast, but you can't stop. Right? So the master cylinder was just completely no vacuum. There was no assistance, right? So I was just pushing on the brakes. You could go, but you can't stop. I'm like, don't get in front of me. That's not going to be my fault. This is full-on Flintstones. Stick your foot out and try and stop. And so genius over here was I'm going to put a Moroso vacuum pump to try and build vacuum into the engine because I don't like electricity. And I don't want to have to build vacuum for the engine with electric. Right? Because it makes this me sound. It's really annoying. Also, this is Rose's electrician. I parked Maria outside my shop. I turned on all the lights and turn signals and all the things that needs electricity in a car. And then I went into the engine and I started ripping out wires until something I need stops working. And then I put it back. And I had a huge pile of wires. And there's seriously 3 wires in the engine of that car. And that's all you need, right? And I did not want to add any more electric to this car because I'm not an electrician, obviously, right? So I put this Moroso vacuum pump, which redoes the whole front end. I have to build brackets and all these belts. And what it did was it pushed the fan further away. I had to get an extension for the fan on the front of the engine. But because it's a 410 horsepower 350, it goes like this, right? So the whole engine goes, if you look in there, it's doing its thing, right? It does its thing. And the very first time I was like, and the fan sheared off the front end and ripped up all the belts and hoses in the hood. So it looked like a bear or Wolverine had gotten to the hood and just attacked it from the inside, right? And of course, Rose gets on the side of the road and I saw the steam of coolant and I'm standing there I see an opportunity, right? So I put a cowl induction hood, which you guys see. It has the Sylvester Stallone nose now. That's the story of that, in case you're wondering. And this was the first performance at the Denver Art Museum. So a cool fact about El Caminos is that the spare tire goes in the cab. Where, you might ask? Behind the seats, under the bed. There's a big cavern that's about this big. Obviously, it should be filled with speakers, right? So I put, 2,000 watt amp and a bunch of 12s. And right? And so there's my mom, there's my niece, there's my bestie, there's her girlfriend, there's my cousin, there's me, and then there's my trans friend, and we all marched up towards the Denver Art Museum, blocking all the roads in downtown Denver with this thing, and then I busted a heartbeat, right? So it was and we just like walked up. I was like, once for warriors, be proud of me. It was a moment. And it's also because being in the car world, how are women treated? If you see a woman in relationship to a car, it's generally scantily clad, draped over a fender. Yes. Right? It's generally how it works, right? When I go back to that tusked piece, every single day going to school for automotive science or going to car shows and standing there or being on crew of a race car is a constant punch in the face, right? The amount of sexual assault and abuse and inappropriate things that happen to you constantly, also the condescension and just the basic sexism is out of control, right? And after a while, you're just like, and so it's like, well, what do? I gotta flip the script, right? I gotta glitch it out. And I want people to look at it and go, wait a minute, right? It was like when I got an award for Maria in the 80s Street Division at the Lowrider Magazine car show in Espanola, and they called my number, and I was all excited, and I went to the stage, and I stood on stage with two very scantily clad women who were going to take their picture with me, and they were both like, what do? Right? I may be queer, but I don't objectify like that, right? So I was like, you stand there, we're good. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to be like, yeah, you got the chicks I got. Us perpetuating the same thing. You know what I mean? Here's another one. And the whole point is not about weapons, and it's not about warriors being the battle that we're doing is to love ourselves and to claim space that has been taken from us for centuries. The battle that we're doing is in grounding and remembering. The battle that we're doing is finding community and togetherness and camaraderie in this war that we're in every single day. And I love blocking streets with this. It's like, no, you wait your turn. This was our land, and the bodies of our ancestors are under this road. You can wait your turn. That's the feeling I get. And so you see the outfits, how this is a friend of mine who took these iconic photos. Kate Russell's amazing photographer. And she asked us to walk around with the just to bring that energy and the intentionality behind the car itself to it. And I want to remind everybody that Maria is such a character. She's so me. Every time she has to be on for something, she throws a little fit, right? I can cruise her to the grocery store, I could pick the kid up from school, all these things, but as soon as she has to go to a car show or be on stage for something, she has a complete meltdown on the side of the road. Like a full-on, you need to rebuild my carburetor 5 times today to find out that the float sunk. And then you got to drive 3 hours to get a new float and pick me up on the side of the road because I'm going to sit here because something about her is a reflection of me. So this was the night before Maria came on tour with the Hearts of Our People. I had taken her into town to detail her so that she'd be real pretty for everybody. Remember when I talked about making things palatable and acceptable? I was still struggling with that. Right? And I was like, they want my car? Oh my gosh, I better make her really pretty. I got to make sure that there's no mustard in the bed from the last time I put the kid in there with a hot dog while I needed to weld, right? And so I took her into town, and the battery shorted, And the cable that is the grounding strap from the battery to the frame, it basically welded itself off, and the battery fell into the fan and sprayed battery acid all over everything on the side of the road. And I was like, okay, we have a couple problems here. Hey, I got to get home. And so I walked along the side of the road and found some baling wire, and I tied the battery back on and rigged a new grounding strap from the battery to the car. And then I went home and I spent the rest of the evening rewiring the whole front end of this car. Right? And so this was the night before Maria went to Hearts of Our People. And so if you open the hood, there's still baling wire holding the battery in. And I love that about it. I want everybody to know there's baling wire in there. She might be pretty fabulous, but she's got baling wire. And something about it makes me feel like, no, we all got baling wire in there somewhere. And then I got really mad at her, and I said, you need to go sit in a museum and think about it. And then I get this link to Vogue, and she's like, Mom, I'm going places. I don't even need to drive. They just push me around. And I was like, shoo, this girl. I think, yeah. She's funny. There, yeah, see, my point. I'm like, really? There's baling wire in there. I spilled the beans. But really, the first time I saw this photo here on social media, I cried because I respect Maria Martinez. She is my ancestor. She's one of those faces on the wall that's saying, hey, I'm watching you. Behave. Right? And as much as we in this time feel like we're in control of what's happening, this felt like acknowledgement from herself. Right? I felt validated by that powerful force that is Maria Martinez, that still is in that pot. Where her hands touch that clay will forever be in that pot. And she let it be next to Maria the car. And that kind of validation makes me cry. More than Vogue, more than Forbes, that, right? Because I feel like, thank you, I must be doing something right. That my ancestors might be proud of me like that and show me that that's true. This is my biggest, so Maria was my first baby, and this is my most current, it's like relational aesthetics, performance art, and it's a lot of janitorial service and a lot of and she's really spectacular. That's baby Nugget. And that's her with my mom planting, because it all goes back to the beginning, right? And she's showing her how to plant the seeds in the ground so that we have our harvest. And we just harvested those corn that they were planting in this picture. That was this spring. That's the point, right? Thank you.
We have time for a couple questions if anyone has any.
What's next?
Oh. Me and my buddy Stacy and my little girl drove to Detroit this last weekend, which is 24 hours one way, to trade a 64 Riviera that I had sitting in the yard for 5 years for one that runs. Oh, it's so pretty. That's what's next. I'm applying for grants to get my friend Stacy to apprentice with me because I think it'll be really powerful to work with another woman and build a car. That one's going to be bagged. I thought about hydraulics, but I think I'm going to save that for the 68 Buick Skylark. And I'm thinking a lot about, hey, I try not to box in my ideas before I make them. So understand that this is very plastic, this is very new and fresh, and I allow it to be whatever it needs to be. But right now, I'm excited to. Leave the outside, it has this really spectacular patina of like layers of paint that have been like dried and scratched off. That is just so deliciously beautiful. It looks like the perfect glaze that you always try to get with pottery, but it doesn't work, so boom, right? And then it has like, it runs, right? But the interior is kind of funky, and I'm like, ooh, what I want to do is do the most beautiful interior you could possibly imagine, where every single part is a piece of art, and you'd sit there and look at every single part and still be like, whoa, 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 right? And so the whole interior just be like delicious, right? And so the outside is a total sleeper, and nobody knows what's inside. And it's a 425, right? Big block V8, which they call it a 465 Wildcat engine, right? So it's like really powerful, but it's slow and in control, and it's focused on the inside. So when you get into it, the relational experience will be about like, how am I holding myself on the inside? Because what's on the outside doesn't really matter. And what people think of it doesn't really matter, right? So can we be that? And like, oh, I just can't wait to be like, feel that. And I feel like it's part of my evolution. Does that make sense? Cool. So, yeah, if you guys come to Espanola, we'll go cruise and you can tell me if it's working.
Anyone else?
So Santa Clara is right adjacent to Espanola. So we don't really cruise through the Pueblo, you cruise through town, right? From Sonic to Sonic, there's like a cruise line. And it's really important, you know? When I was a kid, I was like, when I grow up, I'm going to cruise Sonic to Sonic. And that was like, I just want to be able to do this. Like, there's something about pride, right? And in Espanola, there's like, it's a hard place. It's not just the lowrider capital of the world, it's also the heroin capital of the world. And it's really, for being a small town, it's hurting. And it has a lot of historical trauma it's carrying, right? And if anything's keeping these people alive, it's cruising from Sonic to Sonic. Even if they have to go home to hell, the least we can do is feel that pride tickle down your back, because that'll keep you alive. Swear to God. You know? And that's important. I understand the importance where communities that are hurting find ways to stay alive. Find reasons to believe. Find something to dedicate themselves to. In Espanola, it's that. So we don't cruise the Pueblo, right? We cruise Banya from Sonic to Sonic, right? And you find your friends and you pull over and talk in the parking lot. Or you just stop in the road and make everyone go around you. That's also quite normal. Before cell phones, that's how we used to find all the people, you know. I remember that. Can you believe that? But that's not the only thing I'm doing. I also have a few shows. I have a solo opening right now in San Francisco at Jessica Silverman Gallery, which has been absolutely spectacular. And then I'm also going to be doing a show at the Kinderhook School through Jack Shaman Gallery in the spring. And that's supposed to be, that really is scary to me because it's the election year and I want it to be really, really powerful. So, no pressure. But plants and animals are dying right now and the earth is like on the brink, so we better do something and do it now. We better not mess around, no? I got this privilege and I got this access and I better do the right thing and I better sleep at night so that I can actually pull it off. Thank you for believing in me.
What has been your relationship with your art and your tribe? What is within your community?
You know, because a lot of people in my family support themselves with their art, that there's, in Santa Fe or the New Mexico scene, there's kind of a limited resource pool that we're all taking from, that we all depend on for our livelihood, to feed our children, right? And there's tension there. There can be some tension, right? So a lot of times we don't talk about our art with each other, right? And I realize that when I make my work, it's for very specific audiences. I ask myself, who am I talking to, right? And with the El Camino, it's been so much a personal conversation. The El Camino was made to drive through Espanola, and where people have been fighting, they can stand and find appreciation over the same thing, right? It's about healing our traumas. It's about building strength for indigenous people. Different work is intended for different audiences, right? My work that has to do with challenging the stereotypes around indigenous people, we don't need it. We know we're messy. We know we're doing it. We're living it every day. So that work isn't necessarily intended for Santa Clara people. It's intended for people who still hold those stereotypes, so that we can deconstruct those on the outside, because those stereotypes are incredibly damaging to the ones who are left living, right? And so I think a lot about the direction that I want things to go, and who's holding certain places of power, and how we can affect those carefully, strategically, right? Just like if I blow your guys' eardrums, you can't hear me. If I get too crazy, if I punch you in the face, you're probably not going to have a conversation with me, So I think a lot about tact. And so, I was talking to someone recently about visual sovereignty. And I think that accountability is something to be really, I don't think that I am incredibly sovereign, because I believe that accountability is important. And that if I have all this privilege and I just do whatever I want without any accountability anywhere, that's not the point. That I have to think about the consequences and the relationships my work have with the world and where, right? And I think Maria, in this group of work as indigenous women, right, is incredibly powerful because it's showing a very specific aspect. And in a sense, all the work that's in the show, right, from Sonia to Kara, to my Aunt Nora, to, Carrie Atombi, and everyone's work, and Diani, it's almost like we crewed up, right? We got into that car like that. And Maria is the car that they all cruise, right? And I think it's pretty powerful that she's appropriate in this place, and that was done well. And I'm grateful.
Obviously, Maria Martinez was somebody that was very important to you and is very important to you. But I don't see any black pottery or anything that she was known for, and that big, beautiful pot that, of course, is in the show, and then the ones that we all know that she did, and she is definitely that person that you think of when you think of that black pottery, and some, I guess, in the other, like in San Ildefonso as well, but I don't see any evidence of that. Is that because, were you ever interested in learning that, or were you interested in going on? And obviously this is a completely different kind of thing. It's a newer, a modern, a message. It's something from inside you. I don't know if those pots were that for her, but I'm just interested that there's not a continuity here, yet she is the person that you look back to and get energy from.
Right. Maria Martinez actually invented that style, so it was new for her. And I know how to make that kind of pottery because I grew up watching my family do it, and it's been a very conscious decision not to. Yeah, it's been a very conscious decision not to. And like I said, Maria, the car, is one of my most dangerous pieces of art for the tribe, right? One time I was at a car show and someone from the Pueblo walked up to my car and was like, "What's that?" Because, it referenced something to him that he felt shouldn't be shared. And, I felt like I navigated that pretty well as I'm still living in the tribe. But there are people who carry on that tradition. And I'm often used as kind of the devil's advocate towards the perpetuation of traditional systems because I'm so contemporary, right? I love traditional pottery. I love it. I love seeing people do beautiful things with it. I love the work of Eric Fender. I love all the people in my family who are still doing really traditional pottery and branching off in their own small ways. I really love that people are perpetuating. If there wasn't a market, like Maria Martinez found, for pottery, why make pots when we could use metal pans, right? We might have actually completely lost those skill sets, right? So because of collectors, we continue to do these things, which is actually an interesting, funny dichotomy, right, that we're facing. And there are people who are still doing that. Because of the weirdness of me, and because of the constant questioning that happens within me, I am a bad Indian. We have this joke in our family, and we say, "You're such a good Indian," when we do the right thing, right? You're such a good Indian. And I'm like, there's a lot of things that we do to perpetuate our culture, and that makes us a good Indian, right? And I'm like, I'm so glad when people are good Indians because I'm really bad at it, And I think I've hated myself a lot, and I've judged myself because, you can't do it right because you're white, or whatever I've heard in my life, And I feel like, no, my job is something else, And because they're not doing this, I got to do this, And this is the conversations I'm building with you guys right now. We're having this conversation because I do this and not that, right? And me making a black-on-black pot that's a car is scary. Am I stepping on toes? It's a good question. And I should be asked that, and I should be held accountable. Rose, why are you doing that? And if I don't think about it from every single facet and try and hold it really clear in my heart that I'm doing the right thing, or I believe that I'm doing the right thing that's helping us, that's keeping us alive. My brother is one of the most spiritual, cultural preservationist people. He speaks the language fluently. He's always in our ceremonial houses. He's doing the right thing. He's a very good Indian, And I go, you do that, bro. Meanwhile, I'm going to keep the young people alive so they don't kill themselves by overdosing on heroin so they can actually show up to the kiva and participate in the ceremonies and speak the language, because if they kill themselves, there will be no culture. That's my job, right? We all have our jobs. And my heart is, let's keep these people alive. Let's give them something to live for. Let's see them where they stand in the shit and say, I see you standing, and it's hard. I've been there, right? And I know it's a struggle. Now let's foster you, and you're okay, you're a good thing, you can do it. Shh, 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 right? This is what I'm doing to the world, like shh, 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 and myself, right? So that I can get to the point where they can go down and learn the language, so that they can have children and pass it on, right? So that they do show up to the culture and carry it on, because that's all we got, and there's not very many of us. Does that make sense? Cool. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Rose.